this lesson, we're going to learn to sew a blanket stitch applique, as well as a buttonhole stitch. The blanket stitch and the buttonhole stitch are often used interchangeably, but they're actually two different stitches. Let's begin with the blanket stitch. The blanket stitch is a decorative stitch that goes along the edge of the fabric. You usually see it a lot in felt crafts. If you're using this to join two layers of fabric, you're going to start in between the two layers. Then come from the back to the front from the exact same spot. When you pull your thread, don't pull it all the way on your first stitch. Instead, go through the loop and out. That's how you will anchor your first stitch. The way I remember the blanket stitch is that you always go front to back, up and over. I like to use my left hand as I stitch to guide my thread towards the left, because this is the direction we're going to be making our stitches. And then I'll use my right hand to stitch. On this stitch, if you can, try to make all the stitches the same length here, and also try to make them equally spaced. If you like, you can draw yourself guide marks to help evenly space your stitches. Guide your thread to the left. Place your needle from front to back. Lift your needle up and over the thread. Your needle is now resting on top of the thread. And pull it through. Guide your thread to the left, front to back, up and over. Guide your thread to the left, front to back, up and over. Continue in this manner all the way across the edge. When you get to the corner, you're actually going to sew 3 stitches to complete the corner. One, two, three. And then continue stitching as before. When you're ready to tie a knot, such as to get more thread or to change colors, you can simply make a loop, go under your stitch, and up through the loop. Then hide the end of your thread tail between the layers. To start your next color, again, go between the layers. Push it up through your knot. And continue stitching in the same way. When you're ready to do your last stitch and tie your knot, hook your needle under the first string of thread. It's usually a little crooked because it was first and it didn't have anything to catch onto. So go under that thread, up through the top of the first stitch, and then tie your knot, and this will help to keep that stitch vertical. Hide your thread tails, slide your needle next to the knot and in between the layers of fabric. slide your needle out some distance away and gently pull. Then trim off your thread. Applique with the blanket stitch is very similar. Start from the back side. Place your needle down through the single layer of fabric, the one on the back, and then come up through exactly where you started. And go under your first loop to anchor your stitch. Once you have your first stitch in place, you're going to do exactly like you did on the edge. You're going to go front to back, up and over. Front to back, all the way through. And this time come up right at the edge of your shape and go over your thread. Guide it to the left, front to back, up and over. Front to back, up and over. When you're ready to change threads or tie your knot, simply poke your needle through the fabric right next to where your stitch ended. Pull it to the back and tie your knot. It is a good idea as you're stitching to frequently check the back of your fabric to make sure it looks okay and that there aren't any loops or tangles. When you continue sewing, poke your needle from the back to the front, just to the right of your stitch, and continue stitching. Front to back, up and over. When I get to my last stitch, I'm going to go just to the left of this thread here. And you can see in my first stitch, this kind of slides a bit. I'm going to hook it just behind the thread from my first stitch to help lock that in place so it's nice and vertical. If that was the blanket stitch, then how is the buttonhole stitch different? While the blanket stitch is used a lot in decoration, the buttonhole stitch is actually used to construct buttonholes, and you also find it occasionally in embroidery. It's a bit stronger than the blanket stitch. With the blanket stitch, your thread just hooks under the next stitch. In the buttonhole stitch, it actually wraps around it, so it's a little bit more sturdy. Anchor your first stitch, just like we did before. So go up from the back, come back around exactly through the same spot, whipping around the edge. And go up through your loop. Once you have your anchor stitch, you're going to go down from the back side. So we're going to go back to front. So from the back of the fabric to the front of the fabric, go ahead and place your needle in there. Don't pull it through just yet. What you want to do next is you want to make sure that your thread is going around the needle. So your thread should go behind the needle and under the needle. So you kind of have a loop. your needle is resting on top of both. So up here, the needle's above the thread, and down here, the needle is also above the thread. So you go back to front, around, and down, and then pull your needle through. So there's our first stitch. The way I like to do this is I like to make my loop. So I'll make my loop. I go from the back to the front and make sure your thread's going round. Again, the needle is on top of both. And pull it down. Make a loop. Place your needle from back to front. Make sure it's going around and pull down. Loop, back to front, check around, down. Continue this process. When you're ready to tie the knot on the buttonhole stitch, since you've already got a good loop right up here at the top, you can usually just pull the thread towards the back and anchor it at the bottom of this stitch. Normally, when you sew the buttonhole stitch, you don't leave any space between the stitches. You put them right next to each other to make a really strong edging for your buttonhole. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you next time. Happy sewing!